Hi, my name is John Mancini. I'm president of AIM, and I thought I'd share with everyone a bit of my expedition to discover business value in Twitter. And so here's my presentation on the 16 things that I've learned about Twitter in the last couple of weeks. If you'd like to follow me on Twitter, you can follow me at jmancini77, and you also see the names of some of my colleagues as well. The first observation, and I will admit that I came to this question with a bit of a predilection that it was a waste of time, is that my conclusion is that it is not a waste of time, and I'd like to spend the rest of my presentation giving you a sense of why it isn't and what you can do about it. You need to understand, first of all, what Twitter is, if you're not familiar with it. It is a set of 140 character messages that are sent both to people following you, and that is kind of like thinking about a mass instant message, if you will, as well as messages that can be sent to folders through things called hashtags, and I'll talk about that in a minute. For me, I think one of the things I've learned along the way is that it's worthwhile to think a little bit about separating my business social networking communications from my personal communications. And so for me, I am going to focus in on doing most of my personal stuff on Facebook and most of my business stuff on Twitter and LinkedIn. Part of the reason for doing that is what I call the Jennifer corollary. And Jennifer is my sister, and the reason I call it the Jennifer corollary is I at first had my Twitter post directly set up so that they would update within Facebook statuses. And after doing that for a little while, given that you tend to tweet much more often than you update Facebook statuses, after a while she said, "John, I don't understand any of your Facebook statuses." And that's because they all tended to be reposts from Twitter, and they were focused on document management, records management, things like that. So for me, I think disconnecting those two, keeping Twitter on Twitter and Facebook on Facebook, I think is something that I personally find to be something much more useful. Fifth thing I learned along the way is that the number of followers isn't everything, but I do think you need to get to a little bit of a critical mass. If you have 3 people following you, you kind of think to yourself, why am I wasting my time on this? And so my next point relates to how you go about building your follower base. The way I found that's most useful to build your follower base is to look at people whom you respect and see who they are following. And that gives you then a good basis for starting to follow people. I don't think you need millions and millions of people following you in order to get business value out of this. It depends on the universe that you operate within. If you're a celebrity, you might need 1 million. If you're in the content management business, you probably need a heck of a lot less than that. But build your follower base at least to the point where you have something where it seems like there's some folks following you. And do that by looking to people whom you respect. Seventh thing, took me a little bit to understand the terminology. There's lots of terminology out there, so don't get overwhelmed by it. You only need a few things to get started. RT basically means retweet. And what that basically means is you find a post, a tweet that somebody has made that you find value in, and you distribute it to your audience. And that's a good way to acknowledge people and acknowledge some of the things that they're doing that are worthwhile. The D code relates to sending a direct message to somebody. The little A, @ sign, basically copies somebody on your tweet. And then hashtags, which are indicated by the pound sign, is essentially a way to put a tweet in a particular folder. And I'll talk about that a little bit more in a second. As I say, there's an awful lot of terminology out there. I think at times it's used to exclude people who aren't in the circle at the moment. But keep in mind these 4 is kind of enough to get you started. You can find a directory of hashtags at hashtags.org. Some of the hashtags I've found useful are, for example, #AIM or #ECM or #CMS, and those are ways to find messages that are related to the things that I happen to care about. I think hashtags are also a way to point your messages to people who may not be following you right now. and are also a way to get them perhaps to follow you. So if you have a message that's related to content management, for example, give it the hashtag #ECM, and then people that are searching on ECM will find that message and hopefully find your observations pithy and will choose to follow you. My 10th observation is I think it's probably a use for some of these more mundane kinds of observations, but I guess and again it reflects my dichotomy between Facebook for personal and Twitter and LinkedIn for business, is try to say something useful. The first one, by the way, the typo there is not my typo, that was in the original post. This site, tweettrail.com, is interesting to track who is talking about what. So you can search, for example, in this case it was on ECM, and get the top tweeters over some time interval against that topic. And that's a good sense also, a way of finding other people whom you may wish to follow, who are talking about the kinds of things that you care about. My 12th observation is that Twitter is a terrific application when it comes to events. And the reason I say that is that the first place I ran into Twitter in a very substantive way was at an event called Digital Now a few weeks back. The hashtag for that is DN09. And what they did basically was use Twitter as a way to gather audience feedback, audience commentary, audience insight into the presentations that were going on, and then bring those directly into the presentation itself. One way to have meaningful content in your tweets is to link your blog feed directly to Twitter. You can do that using twitterfeed.com. Also, you will be asked in Twitter feed whether you want to attach any prefixes to your posts. And that's a good place to stick some hashtags in that relate to some of your core issues. My 14th observation, a program called Twiddleizer is useful in terms of giving you a sense of how you are doing. This is just the very thin look at what they do. They have all sorts of interesting things to look at in terms of analyzing your feeds. You can see, for example, in my case, influence is somewhat low and clout is somewhat low at this point, mainly because I'm brand new to this. You can also see that signal is very high, which reflects my bias for communicating things that have value. Just a couple of other interesting things to think about. First of all, there's a convention called Follow Friday on Twitter, and that's using the hashtag Follow Friday. That's a way to give support to your other favorite tweeters that are out there. Use a widget to post your Twitter feeds to your blog and get some cross-pollination going there. The easiest way that I've found to post on the fly, there are a lot of thin clients that are out there for cell phones, but I just find the texting to be the most simple, and you can do that by enable text updating in Twitter and posting to 40404. I would be discriminating about what texts come into your cell phone, mainly because it can be somewhat overwhelming as your follower base grows. And then the last thing is I'd establish a little bit of discipline for yourself in terms of Twitter. It can be very habit-forming. And the last point that I have is a program called Tweetdeck is really quite awesome in terms of giving a full dashboard of what's going on within your Twitter universe. We recommend that you get Tweetdeck. It's free. All you have to do is download it, but it will greatly enhance the whole Twitter experience that you have. So I'd like to thank you for sharing a little bit of time with me today. We'll probably update this over the next couple of weeks as I learn a few more things. And if you haven't been to our social networking site at informationzen.org, it's a good place to stay updated on things in the information management area. And if you haven't been to my blog at Digital Landfill, you can find that at aim.typepad.com, or just go to Google and input Digital Landfill and it'll take you right there.